Hey everybody, thanks for joining us today. My name is Kelley Mack, and I'm a principal on the Workbench team. For those unfamiliar with Workbench, we're an early stage enterprise VC based in New York City. Being based here, we have the unique opportunity of being close to many of the Fortune 500 that call New York City home, such as financial services, media, telecom, pharma, and others. And this proximity allows us to have ongoing conversations with these leading technologists on major trends, priorities, and pain points in the enterprise. As our motto goes, great things happen at the intersection of suits and hoodies. So we've kicked off this series of webinars highlighting important enterprise themes that we've been tracking here at Workbench. We've done one on AI, one on automation, and we have one today on data engineering. And we're super thankful to have partnered with JPMC on this one. And with that, I'd love to pass the Zoom mic over to our co-host from JPMC to say a couple of words.
Hey, Kelley, thank you. Delighted to be here, and we're thrilled to be part of the ecosystem that is thriving and that is New York Enterprise Tech. And what an opportunity for us to be here today with you and the team at Workbench and partner on this interesting and very relevant topic. Look, as you know, in our commercial banking practice, we're focused on building relationships with founders and founding teams from the really early Series A moment all the way through to an IPO and everything in between. And look, we believe that we're the only bank that you'll ever need, and would love to tell you why. But let me stop talking and let me pass it over to you for the main event. And we'll have my contact information up on the Zoom room soon. And with that, let's hear what Steve and Tim have to say today.
Awesome, thank you, Nihad. So with that, as Nihad mentioned, we have two really awesome, esteemed guests joining us today on this panel on data engineering. And we're going to start off with some quick introductions. So to our panelists, can you please provide us a brief overview on who you are, your role, and what you focus on? And as usual, icebreaker, tell us something about yourself that isn't found on your LinkedIn. And we will start with Steve.
Thanks, Kelley. Hey, I'm Steve Turk, Chief Data and Analytics Officer for the commercial bank at JPMorgan. In this role, I'm responsible for all our data platform, all data management and privacy initiatives, as well as our machine learning AI initiatives. So it's kind of an all-encompassing everything data about companies and clients that the commercial bank services. Something interesting that you'll not find on my LinkedIn is that I'm a musician. I play the piano as well as guitar. And I spent COVID doing metal riffs from the 1980s, much to my family's, they don't share the same enthusiasm for my taste of music. But so with that, I'll turn it over.
Awesome.
Tim.
We'll have to jam after this.
All right.
Next, Tim Delisle from Datalogue.
Hey folks, my name's Tim, CEO and co-founder of Datalogue. We enable cross-functional teams to get access to operational data and integrate those systems into this different systems that they use for analytics. So super excited to be here. A random fact about myself that isn't on LinkedIn is the fact that I love to do triathlons. It's just kind of a hobby. So this weekend we did half Ironman homegrown since everything got canceled this year. Yeah, that's the random fact.
Nice. And so with that, let's kick off this panel. And today's topics, what we're going to go through is the rise of data engineering in the Fortune 500, some of the biggest challenges to successful data programs, and then talk a bit about the modern data landscape and where it's heading. For the folks on the line, feel free to pop in with questions in the Q&A and chat. We will get to them either throughout the conversation or we have some time at the end to ask the questions. So to kick off, this one's for Steve. Much of your career has been in finance and on the business side, and now you are leading the data and analytics role for the commercial bank at JPMC. Would love to hear about your story and how you got here.
The way I like to explain it to others is it's the road less traveled. So I started off actually in consumer products. I was a brand manager, Procter & Gamble. Left to become a unfortunately failed .com entrepreneur, but which got me interested in technology and data. I then joined Jamie Dimon had just become CEO of Bank One. I joined the bank just for a couple years. That ended up being 20 years. Working in various parts of the bank. I'm starting with helping consolidate banking systems with mergers, so giving me a flavor for how the bank was built from the bottoms up, to also then helping drive the front office through various sales, and then ultimately a global CFO for our payments business. The key thing that underpins all those experiences is that the way I've run my organizations has been to be data driven. So making sure that we had a data foundation and use that data to then drive the recommendations and ultimately solutions. What I found as I was going through my career, especially at the bank, was that the data wasn't always there. So I had to build up the environment to not only make a decision, but to sustain those decisions. So that's how I got to where I am. So I was tapped 4 years ago to kind of move away from the CFO / business strategy path to leading our overall data efforts. And then, as I mentioned, it's really end to end from call it our platform to how we manage the data to how we use it to drive insights. And it's been a wild ride, but I think we're just hitting some of our best days.
Yeah, definitely. And Tim, I'd love to hear a little bit of background on yourself and Datalogue. I know you started in academia, worked a bit on the corporate side, and then started your own company. What's the genesis of Datalogue?
Yeah, I'm a reformed pre-med student, so if there's any students in the in the audience, just note that you could go from hard sciences. Then I went to business school for a year at Cornell. Hated the fact that I was learning about a whole bunch of problems, but didn't necessarily have the technical skills to solve them in the enterprise. And then managed to bust my way into Cornell Tech. The dean there gave me a shot, and I graduated with a master's in CS. So weird academic path, but during my master's degree, I focused on leveraging machine learning to automate grunt work in the ETL process. And the reason I decided to focus the work there was I spent a summer at Merck between my 2 grad degrees, and it was incredibly painful to do anything with data. And we really kind of decided to start this business from my experiences at Merck and from my academic focus. And co-founder ended up quitting his job as a Apache software engineer at ClassPass, joined me on a wild ride. We were bootstrapped for the beginning, and since then have been solving problems for some of the world's largest companies. So super excited to be here.
Awesome to hear. Took that leap. So Steve, going back to Steve and being data-driven, data can enable a lot in the enterprise, from better efficiency, revenue generation. What are you most excited about when it comes to utilizing data at a company like JPMC?
I think that when you get as big as JPMC, and also you understand, for banks that were built themselves on acquisitions, you end up having kind of this, not only a siloed problem, but end up having layers that separate people that actually know the answers from the decision makers. So I view my role as, how do we close the gap between the decision makers who are using data day to day to make the best decisions around client selection or managing risk, and the folks who actually know the data and what the answer should be. So you might imagine that that's not, breaking down silos is both can both be a technical problem as well as sometimes a human capital problem. But when you do make those connections, and so that you're actually bringing together people that normally wouldn't interact together, and it's all around helping solve business problems, that's really rewarding.
And just to double click there on decreasing that gap between decision makers and technologists, what works? What have you seen, whether it be, you mentioned it's a people, process, and technology issue across the board, but would love to hear, is there anything within that you're particularly excited about, that you've seen, work for you at JPMC?
Yeah, so I'd say the part, because I've done this a few times, but you know, as this is probably the biggest platform I've had in terms of sharing this I'm gonna call it data and technology philosophy, that eliminating the handoffs between what data is in our systems and actually decision makers. So removing that middle layer of people that are buffing and kind of massaging the data so that it looks good to the end user, but then it's never replicable, right? That's the key. So getting people to actually interact with the actual data, warts and all, and then using that warts and all process to build a continuous improvement cycle is the way that I've seen, you know, real breakthroughs happen.
Yeah, it's a great point. And it comes full circle to, you know, why we're talking today about data engineering. We've seen data engineering emerge as an essential function to building a data-driven program. Tim, I'd love to hear from you. What has contributed to its rise in importance? And maybe would love to hear from you what data engineering means.
Yeah, I'm not sure who the second Tim is on the line, or if that's my audio double clicking in. So for us, data engineering is kind of all the processes that go from you've got raw data to you've got data that's deliverable in a system that someone's going to derive analytics from it. And we like to think about it as essentially the series of processes for essentially the supply chain of your data, right? And the analogy I like to use most is if you were McDonald's and you were trying to make a French fry, right? You're trying to deliver the best possible French fry to your end consumer. For us in the data space, that French fry is insights, right? It's something that is fully baked, ready to eat, ready to make decisions, as Steve is mentioning. But the truth of the matter is that data, like potatoes that eventually get turned into French fries, needs to go through a series of processes before you can derive insights. And in our experience, it's the entire value chain that goes from that source system where the data is collected all the way to the systems where insights can be generated. And what's interesting these days is we've seen an evolution in kind of two types of data engineering. One that is very classical in nature, kind of the classic like ETL, just move it from the source system, get into the destination system. And we're starting to see another breed where it's all about kind of feature engineering for predictive modeling. And what's interesting is we're seeing a lot of people kind of use technologies for that latter type of process, for the classical ETL stuff, and essentially overcomplicate a ham sandwich on that front and drive insane amounts of overbloated budgets and costs. And then we're seeing them really underutilize a lot of the kind of old school systems for the feature engineering side of the house. And there's an interesting interplay in terms of the pendulum swinging from like new school technology to old school technology. So to answer the original question, like we consider data engineering to just be all of the underlying processes and tools and systems that go from raw data to delivering that data in an analytics ready system. But the flavors of data engineering are changing over time, and the way people like to do work has changed. And what I love to see these days is how everyone just goes all in on a distributed data structure to solve these problems. So like all in on distributed file systems to store our data. That seems weird. All in on Kafka queues to store our data, then run analytics on it. That seems weird as well. Like we like to take the approach of data engineering is mostly engineering, and then you apply kind of classic computer science, like what's the best system for the job to solve for these problems. So we're convoluted answer to say like data engineering is complicated and it's got a lot of moving parts and we've got a bunch of opinions about it.
Those are all good points, and actually speaks to when we were preparing for this conversation, we had talked about the centralization and decentralization of the data organization and how that's supposed to support the broader, business units, et cetera. And I think that you both had agreed that both methods are important, but Steve, I'd love to turn to you, organizationally speaking. What have you found to be the most effective method to structuring the data organization to support the business?
So the first is, I mean, the biggest challenge is, first of all, to say, hey, this is why it's very important to have one version of the truth. And because people can come up with all kinds of academic / philosophical reasons why my version and your version, it's okay, we can exist together. But what they miss is what I'd say that, you know, it's almost like the butterfly wing that results in a tsunami, which is the fact that small differences in two different systems can lead to incredible amounts of incremental work, and also the risk of people coming to different answers. So we basically, you know, from my perspective, the foundational principle is it's better to be consistently inaccurate than precisely accurate inconsistently. So like, because once you get to that kind of an approach, a strategic approach, then good things happen in terms of collaboration and incremental benefits and even big ideas. So that, you know, when we're talking about the importance of centralization and decentralization, you know, I'm comfortable working in a highly centralized or a hybrid type environment, but there has to be, you know, pretty strong rule setting. Okay, what's the foundation for that one version of the truth?
So that also goes to a question that came in from the audience around universal data sources. And Steve, I don't know if you can comment on this, but the question asks, can universal data sources be created that meet the needs of all or most consumers of that data, like one perfect data set of all customers or all securities trades? Is this kind of return to the enterprise data warehouse? Curious if you have any opinions there.
I mean, I think that, and I don't want to give too much of how we think about it internally, but I think knowing what your backbone is across, call it your data ecosystem, and how everybody subscribes to that backbone is crucial.
Definitely. Tim, at Datalogue, you use the term self-service data integration. What does this mean in the context of either this decentralization, centralization conversation or data engineering as a whole?
Yeah, I think Steve put it quite well. And I was hoping that we'd be like super like controversial and like have different opinions here, but it turns out we kind of mellowed out and like merged it into one general viewpoint. Like our take here is, in order to drive kind of exponential returns with data, you need the subject matter expert to be tightly integrated in the supply chain of your data. We've got a great example. We work with one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies, and they're on a mission to integrate their many different ERPs. Turns out ERP data is actually quite complex, and you need some level of subject matter expertise to understand what's going on with this particular data asset and what does it actually fundamentally mean. So when we talk about self-service data integration, we talk about putting tools in the hands of the people who know the data and know what types of decisions need to be made about the data and the underlying processes. We talk about empowering those people with tools so that they can go through the process of curating the data from the source system into the analytics environment. And what we see is having the subject matter expert tightly integrated in that supply chain means that you're going to generate more value as a whole for your business. And that's really kind of what we mean by self-service data integration. And we are big believers that at some point you do end up decentralizing a lot of the work. We saw this in product management. We saw this in design. We've seen this in different functions over and over and over again. Like nowadays, if you use Webflow in your marketing department, like your marketing department's creating websites, right? It's not something that you need to file tickets to IT for anymore. It's really tools and systems that are there to really de-skill the fundamental problem that the person needs to solve, to really upskill the organization as a whole. And in our experience with the large banks, and Steve might either agree or completely disagree with me here, but like the average decision maker in a bank, freaking idea how to write Python, and they don't know how to write like distributed computing code. And do they need to do that? No. Like, you can actually procure systems that enable them to actually accomplish the work really easily, curate the underlying data, and you can pull some of those core functions outside of the IT ghetto and bring it into the business, such that it's an enablement for the business rather than kind of a central function where at the end of the day you write an email or you punt a ticket over to a central group, and then eventually you get access to what you need. And the hard things to balance there are, like Steve was mentioning, single versions of truth, governance. All of those components, especially in regulated industries, are things that need to be top of mind. So
I want to throw one thing back at you. So the biggest challenge that I see, and this probably is a pharmaceutical, would apply to pharmaceutical, certainly banking, is that because the executives don't, business makers, decision makers who allocate resources don't always understand the principles of data engineering. I think it's important to make it transparent. So if you have a bunch of, I'm going to call it SME elves kind of in the background magically making things happen, sometimes that sounds too easy, and you get, you know, a classic answer that I've heard throughout my career is, I don't really care how it happens, just making sure it happens, right? Which
yeah,
is
exactly.
when you think about building a data ecosystem, and you think about setting up an environment for exponential growth of value from the data, the executives absolutely have to care, because if not, they can make a wrong decision. So
I totally agree. And I am yet to find an executive that you present a number there and they're just like, okay, yeah, right? Like the average executive oftentimes will go in and challenge over and over and over and over their teams to make sure that it's the right data and that it's giving them the right answer. Because the number one thing that you fear is you walk into a room with your peers and someone says, I sold X amounts of widgets like this year, and then someone else says, actually, no, you sold Y amounts of widgets this year. You're wrong, right? Like, that is massive, massive fear. So what ends up happening, and at least what we see, especially in organizations that are somewhat complex and where you could generate multiple sources of the truth, is that we see executives just send numbers back over and over and over to their teams until they're confident enough in the number that it's been massaged enough, or they've got a wide enough range to be confident to bring it to their peer group and be like, this is the decision that we need. I am yet to see someone who like gets a number is just like yay, nay. Like, that's still, I think we do not have the foundational trust elements in our organizations for that to happen. And like you're saying, like, you need to get transparency and exposure in those central systems, and those executives need a bird's eye view. Like, this is where this number comes from, and here's like the things that were done to that number to ultimately derive it. And I think we really haven't nailed that super well in the industry. Maybe the bank has done it really, really well, but that feels like it's still a challenge of showing and demonstrating lineage and all of the operations that are happening on a data point level, and then ultimately on the insight level. There really isn't an all-encompassing system that we've seen just yet that's able to do that. And then a lot of people are patchworking a lot of different systems together to be able to give that visibility. But curious to know, Steve, like, how much exposure you guys actually give to the executives who are making decisions, and whether you feel like you nailed that problem or whether that's something that's work in progress for you guys.
It's always a work in progress. I think we're definitely closer. I mean, because part of my job for the last 3 years was to lay out that what people were asking for in terms of taking advantages of the called data-driven future was really a data engineering problem combined with a business problem combined with a way to rethink technology. And so we, and Nihad could probably, if he chimed in, could probably say it's been an education process for about 3 years, but they've got the principles now. And what's exciting within JPMorgan, because it is such a big place, we're able to take kind of the successes of our integrated approach and show other people, other organizations within JPMorgan how to do it. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
Yeah, and one thing that I've generally seen across the board is, especially in data engineering and machine learning and data in general, there's a very fine line between digital disruption and just sheer digital distraction. And I've seen organizations kind of go all in from a technology perspective, but really kind of forget the people and processes. So that's one of the cool things about you coming from the business side and kind of bringing that to the table for the organization. Has that been easy, or like has that been kind of a continuous war with the technologists? Like, what's the balance there between practical versus geeky technologist side?
Yeah, actually, to add to that, and this is kind of one of the questions that I had was, I mean, you've been at the bank for a bit of time. You've seen a lot of this transformation happen. What can you share with us from lessons learned of, you know, what have you seen be that way? Yeah, sorry. What can you impart to other organizations going through similar transformations of, like, you know, pitfalls that they may encounter or organizational ways of interacting that they should, you know, focus on?
Yeah, so I'd say that the data problem, enabling, like I said, this is my experience, but you know, I think it's bearing fruit. It's a business, it's a data engineering, and it's a technology problem. You have to have those three legs of the stool working together. And what I've seen in the past is that you've had, you know, I'll use a 2000 era .com analogy, in which you had like lots of fancy PowerPoints and people with, you know, who came straight from consulting that, you know, waving their hands saying, hey, that, you know, we can show that we're going to create a, you know, a brand very quickly, and, you know, pets.com and all these type of things that were sort of, some of you guys maybe in the distant past, or, you know, we weren't aware, but I lived it. I founded a company during that time. And so I've seen kind of up close and personal, the difference between people having an idea for doing things versus the people that actually know how to take that idea and then break it down into its component problems, business, technology, and data, and kind of take a very much a rinse and repeat platform approach that builds over time versus what I call rifle shot solutions, in which someone's trying to solve an individual case, and what they may solve a problem, but the way they solve that problem doesn't help them solve other problems. The other problem now requires a totally new effort. Well, the way that we try to think about it is all problems, you know, what are the common denominators? And then from that, how many problems can we solve? And then once we solve that problem, what new problems can we solve? And so that's the approach that we're taking. So it gets you very into more of a compounding approach to the value versus a tick list, which I think folks who are separated from actually pressing the keys, as I call it, don't always get there.
Yeah.
So JPMorgan is a large organization. You have a good amount of resources. For these problems that you have, having been on the business side, thinking of things financially and the value that you can get, how do you decide between building and buying technology?
So I don't know if anybody out there has done business with JPMorgan, but we definitely, because we have the resources, our natural inclination is try to see if we can solve problems ourselves. So that's by and large, that's the culture of the place. It's changed, you know, a bit, but it's definitely we build a lot of technology. Personally, you know, the way I make decisions is time to value. The second thing is, how complex is the problem? Something that JPMorgan will be limited inherently from being able to solve. As big as we are, we don't see the whole market in some cases, and don't benefit from R&D across larger populations in other cases. And the third thing is that, you know, if I either build or buy, and this is important because this applies to both building and buying, am I limiting my, somehow painting myself in the corner or limiting some bit of opportunity in the future? So that's, you know, those are the three things I think about. And then there's the part that I know that if it's a buy type of recommendation, there's a significant amount of time kind of, from a vendor qualification process and getting people, answering questions why the buy is better than the build.
Tim, flip side of the question, perhaps you've seen in your own customer conversations that they're either evaluating a build situation versus buying and utilizing your product. How do you help make the case for Datalogue where it's not something that you want to build yourself?
I think the mistake that we tend to see often is organizations believing that they are technology company first, and like they don't actually realize that they may be a pharmaceutical company or a bank or like an airplane manufacturer, and they go all in on complicated technology, which at the POC stage, great. I'm sure like a lot of people can go in and they can generate a ton of perceived value at the smaller scale. But then when it moves to actually productionizing products and applications and all of those things, I think a lot of people neglect the maintenance costs associated with these types of systems. And part of that is like, I think our executives, frankly, are compensated on relatively short time windows, where if I've got to go through a 2-year process with Steve to like get my tool in the hands, like Steve, I forget how long you've been there. I think probably more than 2 years, but like generally executives are on relatively short timelines to generate value. And then they're hopping between different roles and jobs and responsibilities. And that creates a lot of incentive for them to kind of do the quick and dirty thing rather than do the thoughtful, long-term business value generating thing. And we see a lot of people go all in on extremely complicated technologies. They've maybe hired a handful of people who know how to handle those technologies, but then those people churn, they move up and down the organization, and then these companies are stuck with apps and services and systems that they really don't have the manpower to handle and manage. And we're seeing this extensively with data engineering workflows these days. Like you should, I think of a Spark job as a mini little application that you're managing. And if you've got 100,000 Spark jobs running in your organization, you're essentially managing 100,000 apps. And we are seeing a ton of companies come back to us, especially saying, look, I've got this disaster of a maintenance problem on my hands. I've hired now 300 data engineers. I'm having a hard time finding extremely highly skilled data engineers, even if they're cool brands, even if they're paying top dollars for the talent. Truth of the matter, there just aren't that many data engineers out there. And so you get to a state where companies are creating kind of this massive bomb that's just sitting there waiting to explode under their feet, and they're not necessarily seeing that. And so that's one thing that we see a lot of companies who go in and do build versus buy, is that the long-term maintenance repercussions are often completely neglected, and then the flexibility that's afforded with vendors who just need to keep up with technology. That like if you're upgrading from Spark 2 to Spark 3, that might be an 18-month process for you, right? Like that could be difficult. And so we're seeing a lot. That's what I meant by overcomplicating the ham sandwich, is just look at the distribution of things that you're doing. I guarantee you like 80 to 90% of it is simple shit. Do simple things for the simple shit, and then keep your people concentrated in building on the complicated stuff. But
yeah,
that might be controversial.
Some people
especially for
really,
people who are trying to like become modern tech companies.
Yeah, some people like complicated ham sandwiches. It sounds pretty tasty. Well, I'd love to. So, Steve, for a team at JPMC, or where you sit at such a high level at JPMC, there can be acute problems within that a data engineer might face, whether it be data quality problems, whether it be challenges in Kafka and streaming analytics. At what point do those problems rise up to you? And at what point should problems not rise up to you, but can be taken care of through, managers under you? And the reason why I'm asking this question is really from the perspective of a startup, right? That is focused on one of these acute problems. How do they, make the case and help make impactful value to someone like yourself?
So two things. So so literally we were a startup within JPMorgan. Someone said, hey, here's a budget. Here's some old assets, kind of transition to the new. And so during the design phase and as individual capabilities ramp up, I'm very hands-on to literally, when we were all physically located, and I guess now via Zoom looking at code. That is, so in terms of how the platform is constructed and what our opportunity areas are, if something goes, I'm very attuned to that. So if someone was coming into my division saying, hey, selling a solution, I would know how that would impact overall, just because of the way that we architected the organization and the platform. I'd say that from an overall perspective, with anything, when something ramps, you make sure you have very strong managers, product managers, our data engineering organization, our IT organization, who are responsible for key components, and they surface the issues. But because there's that common understanding of how things work, even though I'm not a technologist, I have a good appreciation for how this, the problem and what the solution potential could be.
Definitely. Switching over to COVID life, Tim, how have you seen COVID affect businesses that you work with, their strategies and priorities?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we worked a lot with aerospace and the travel industry. That has been extremely hard. And then we work with some of the pharmas and telcos, and those guys are kind of swimming in budgets, and they're having a pretty good time with the situation. So I think pretty much any day in the life, you're exposed to macroeconomic trends and things that are happening, and we see COVID as one of those exceptional macroeconomic trends that's happening. And we've definitely seen budgets tighten up, but one of the core things is that data has remained a core critical component for most companies in terms of executing on their different initiatives. So we're working with a company on helping them with their COVID response and bringing people back at work and understanding proximity and people and all of those things. And they needed to unify a whole bunch of device data that was coming in different formats. So we helped them with that. So we've seen it be a mixed bag, but to be honest, these days, oftentimes if you're not, especially in industries that have been incredibly well affected, incredibly deeply affected, if you are not a top 5 keep the lights on problem type of solution, then you're probably irrelevant for now as budgets tightened up. But if you are helping these companies kind of move the needle on some initiatives, then it's relatively easy to get in and have great conversations. A lot of people are more open to conversations on Zoom. It's just much easier than living on a plane, and that's been a good side relative to be able to have more of those conversations and help companies where they need.
Mm-hmm. Steve, how about for you? How have you seen the impact?
Well, my guitar riffs have got better.
Yeah.
But yeah.
You're gonna have to bring it out later.
So I used to travel about 50% of the time. I only travel about, I'm obviously not traveling now, so I'm a Zoom expert. I'd say what was interesting about the COVID experience was how the bank really didn't miss a step. I mean, our core infrastructure and how we work and the relationships. I don't think we've lost productivity at all. The business problems have been, you might imagine, every macro problem that you hear about, whether it be from how to limit the spread amongst individuals, combined with I'd say the macroeconomic impacts and tracking how things are moving, changing from region to region. We've been, I'd say, from a data standpoint, that's all been at the center. So if anything, the value of good data and the value and why it's a single version of the truth is crucial, and a time like this has just been elevated. So so the team that I work with, we transitioned very well to being 100% Zoom oriented, and I haven't asked anybody if they miss me peering over their shoulder, but they get to share their screens a lot on via Skype.
Yeah, definitely the social aspect did change a lot. Well, so we have two questions kind of about a similar thing within data management. So you had mentioned about trying to standardize that data set, but any best practices that you can share around keeping track of those evolving data sets? And then the second question is one around catalogs and external data providers, and how you manage the licensing and distribution from those types of players. So two different questions, but yeah, I guess we can start with that first one around evolving data sets and what you've seen as best practices for managing that.
Do you want me to take that?
Yeah, Steve or even Tim. Yeah.
I mean, kind of my answer to both is the same. I mean, so the more you operationalize your data and make it and democratize your data, the better it gets, and the better your controls around it in terms of cataloging and automating kind of access capabilities. So like when I think about from one of the biggest challenges within the bank is that there's historically, there's lots of legacy applications and legacy Oracle databases that people managed independently. From a platform perspective, what we are able to do is kind of from a greenfield saying, hey, we're going to be metadata driven. So for your data to be part of this federation, for people to get access, really metadata drives everything. And so, when I think about cataloging, I also think about all the other called metadata components along with whatever the data is coming in, and using that not only to, understand what it is, but also to then, operationalize delivering access to it. The other piece of it is, as it relates to, I'm trying to forget where I lost my train of thought, but that is the key. The key part is that, the more visibility. I mean, by democratizing access, by giving as wide access to the same to the same data, it's going to get better. Especially if you design an approach in which where you're very responsive, so you can demonstrate that if people find stuff, that you fix it.
Yeah, our take on this is the way that you deal with evolving data depends on kind of the ecosystem of data that you've got within your organization, right? So we've seen the rise of the developer in the enterprise as being like a core persona, where developers now can kind of procure oftentimes like their own databases, or they'll use like the MongoDBs of the world, schemaless data sources, and then you've got third-party data that's going to come in, has varying schemas that you're not going to control. And so what we've seen over time was, given the flexibility that we afforded to the data, the operational data sources, we saw the kind of momentary death of the data warehouse that had kind of stringent schemas that were relatively hard to update and manage. And then you needed like these huge workloads to like reconcile your adding a new column to your old school data warehouse. And that was really kind of a big problem. So the industry then moved into, all right, we're going to still deliver our analytics capabilities in our data warehouses generally, but we're going to rely on this intermediate data store capability of the data lake to be able to put anything of any schema. And then we realized, like, holy shit, data lakes turn into data swamps very, very quickly if we just dump all the things in there and we can't find what's going on. I think we saw an intermediate solution, which was, okay, let's try and catalog absolutely everything in the data lake in that kind of metadata first or metadata centric approach, Steve, right? But like, that's going back to, when was Informatica pushing the metadata first approach, like in the 90s, right? That's old school ways of solving these problems, right?
But yeah, no, but I would say that like there's called level of metadata from the swamp through call what is, you know, ultimately for consumption. So like, I think, you know, but so that's my point is that you got to know where your data is coming from and kind of understand what it is. And then when you really are driving operational, like consumption at scale, you know, my opinion is two things. So you got to have your backbone that, you know, that is available at all components that anybody who's part of the ecosystem has to consume from and attach to. And then you have to have the right amount of metadata, to your point, that allows you to operationalize ingestion as well as called democratization of access. And that's the trick, because if not, you could have a whole new industry of everybody trying to know everything that's in the swamp, even though people don't use it.
Exactly.
Or you on the other side, you just throw up your hands and then it's kind of chaos on their side. So there's definitely a you got to. But I think the whole idea of called metadata catalog and backbone, those are the two things you got to get right, and then you can just decide how much centralization you want on top of that.
Yeah, and my point was going to be, like, now you see like the Snowflakes and the Synapses of the world as kind of the cloud-enabled data warehouses that have some flexibility from a schematic standpoint and resource allocation standpoint. So I think what you see is generally in the space, you see these like large pendulums swing from one end to the other. Like, and what I love is working with folks who have quite a bit of experience. Like Steve's one of them. There's a few kind of chief data officers and sometimes CIOs have kind of seen it and lived it before, that have that level of experience, that they've seen the way that things were. Some of the old ad tech dudes these days that are running these organizations know this really, really, really well, because they were building data warehouses back in the 90s when it wasn't sexy, or they were doing big data in the 2000s before big data was a thing. And so you see these pendulums swing, and that experience that's brought to the table by pragmatists in this space is really, really critical and important. And I fundamentally believe that, like, the way that you deal with the ever-changing ecosystem is you create flexibility, but also you create that pragmatic approach of, like, these are just little widgets that are going to change over time, and you need to manage your supply chain really, really well. And you need the level of visibility, you need the level of control, you need the level of metadata, which is kind of the abstraction over your systems. And all of those things are really, really critical in great organizations. And so, like, one of the things that we love is seeing folks who are coming in from experienced industries that have seen it before, because data engineering today is actually not fundamentally that different from data engineering back in the 90s. You're moving data from system A to system B, you're processing it in between, and you're going to be trying to drive to some sort of business outcome. And I think that is the fundamental to, like, how do you organizationally deal with this? You bring in people who know what they're talking about and who know what they're doing, and hopefully they can get over the digital distraction part and really kind of implement systems that afford the critical capabilities that they need.
And I said on Friday was, like, you know, the data scientists are just the SaaS engineer. The SaaS guys learn how to better market themselves as data scientists. So, you know, it's like what's old is new.
Exactly, and you see this repeated over and over and over again, right? And I think what you want is good first principle based approaches to solving these types of problems. You've got critical capabilities that support your business initiatives. You align those things, you execute, and like Steve said, like you approach it from a incremental platform delivery perspective rather than going all in. Like, what I hate to see is just like someone who's like all in on one technology, and you're like, in 2 years that technology is irrelevant, and ultimately you're going to be dated and you're going to be crashing.
Well, the next question I had, and we probably only have time for maybe like 1 or 2 questions, so I'm gonna ask this question and then take one from the audience. But Steve, would love to hear, you know, what are the top 2 areas in data analytics that you would like to see improved? What's on your wish list?
That's great. So I would say, you know, outside of the public cloud, just more generically, you know, much more a better way to aggregate data quicker. Hadoop, you know, kind of, you know, you have various kind of tooling that, you know, that pre-aggregates data so that you can, you know, you can have business or even like SQL jockeys kind of go in and do the work. It's still clunky. I mean, I work across, you know, we have a hybrid environment, and, you know, so, you know, and we're not a you know, we ourselves are not a snowflake shop. It just is, it's clunky. I mean, Hadoop was not meant to do this, but it seems like that's a real opportunity, just to more from in the spirit of democratizing data, to be honest.
Yep.
The second piece is, you know, I still think so many, I call it the data science types, are so focused on like, you know, wrangling the data, then coming up with output that's buffed and polished so that somebody likes it. That's what too many people think data science is. I really want to focus on like the folks who, like, when you think about how within some of the big data-driven companies, you know, the data pipelines are given, the distribution channels are given, so people are really 100% focusing on the algos, you know, peer review of algos continue to get better and better. That approach is what leads to called exponential, you know, call capabilities. That's what we aspire to, but that's also when you really find out who's a good data scientist. So right now, you know, there's, you know, I think there's a lot of kind of differentiating between kind of the people that can wrangle data and present it versus the people that can write the breakthrough code is not as easy as I'd like.
Awesome. Tim, do you have anything to add on just your own experience? And
I want to see like a hybrid cloud snowflake kind of thing, right? Like,
yeah.
that would be incredible. And what we've seen in our customers, we see a lot of companies, like when we're operating at like, say, telco scale, going all in on cloud. Like we as a startup can do that because relative to our headcount, it's puny, right? But when you think about like you're optimizing kind of your IT spend, cloud is actually incredibly expensive. And so we see extremely large scale companies manage their own data centers, and the telcos are great examples there, where like in one of our customers, you need C-suite approval to spin up an EC2 instance, given how costly it is relative to just rack in a server in their environments. And so having the ability to manage a data warehouse at kind of the hybrid cloud level would be incredible. I know Teradata has been trying to kind of bring some innovation in the space, and unfortunately they're kind of seen as the old school legacy folks, and Snowflake, we're hearing in through the grapevines that they might be trying to work on a model that would work like this. But I would like to see democratization of data not come at a stupidly large compute bill for a lot of customers, and I think that would be good for our customers. It'd be good for the environment. Just like the number of Spark clusters that are just running for absolute nonsense is insane, and that's got a non-negligible electricity cost. And I just strongly believe that if we solve those types of problems where democratization of the data was cheap, that would help tremendously for both our customers and the industry at large.
Steve, were you about to say something?
No, I just 100% agree.
Great. Well, good. Glad that we're all in agreement. before we get shut off abruptly at the top of the hour, I want to say thank you to Tim and Steve for spending time with us today and sharing their awesome thoughts on data engineering. Thank you for all that have joined and asked questions and participated. Really appreciate the engagement. And we are going to be hosting this again as a series. We're going to be hosting a couple of these in the coming weeks on DevOps and security. So hope to have you tune in to that then. But with that, hope you all stay well. Thanks again, Steve and Tim, and hope to talk to you all again.
Thanks, folks.
Thanks, everybody.